like certain scenes. And I think that's right. Some biblical scholar in here, correct me, but I think Joseph doesn't even have any speaking lines in all the gospel. I think he might speak something together with Mary at the temple, but he doesn't have anything to say. And we in the church kind of exacerbate that by only putting his story in the lectionary cycle once every 3 years. So I'm glad that we're not following that this year so we can hang out with Joseph. Because as I said, I think his story is really important. And in my opinion, his story represents a second Spirit-assisted miracle in the nativity narrative. Everyone wants to talk about the virgin birth, but I think Joseph actually was part of a second Spirit-assisted miracle, because with the Spirit's help, Joseph does something superhuman, something that most humans find difficult, if not impossible, to do. He changes his mind. Now, I promised you a little bit of science, so here it is. Researchers have long known that one thing that humans are very, very bad at is changing their minds. Study after study after study on the decades have confirmed that once humans know something or have decided something, it is really not that easy to get them to change. Most studies on the matter, which as I said are myriad, follow this pattern. Step 1. Take a group of research participants and present them with some dichotomy. It doesn't really matter what it is, A or B. Then provide them with some information about why choice A is better. Predictably, most research participants will do what? They will choose A when offered that opportunity. Now here's step 2 in the study. Tell those research participants that you actually made up all the information that you gave to them about why A is better. Say, we just made it up for the purpose of the experiment, please disregard it. Then ask them to pick again. What do you think they're going to do? They all still choose A, almost to the last one, right? They've already decided. And it's almost as if they cannot truly integrate the new information you gave them, which is that all their other information was false, right? Well, they almost can't do it. I say almost because sometimes they can with some help. It turns out that unraveling a decision like that from within the brain is actually really difficult. Facts alone cannot do it. Rational thinking alone cannot do it. Perhaps some of you have seen this human limitation operational in some way in our public discourse, right? It's not about information. Ultimately, integrating new information is a lengthy process and involves finding ways to connect new information to information we already know, and slowly over time building neural pathways between that old thing that we know and the new thing that we know. Side note, if your brain is under any kind of stress at all, none of this will work, and essentially you will not ever be able to change your mind. So you can't even start this until you have decreased stress in some manageable way. And all of this is true because we are creatures who evolved to exist in cooperative groups, where going along with what the group believes and how it behaves are critical parts of cohesion and thus of our survival. To put this into context, a rabbit does not have a difficult time changing her mind about something. She can integrate new information like the presence of a predator almost immediately and change course accordingly. That is not what humans evolved to do. I should also tell you, just because it's interesting, it doesn't really have that much to do with Joseph, but that in the world of short-term mind changing, like last-minute decisions to avoid an obstacle while we're walking or driving, things get even more complicated. Scientists at Johns Hopkins designed a study a few years ago to track people's brain on an MRI while they made certain decisions about where to look at images that were presented to them on a screen. And it turns out that changing your mind actually takes several different parts of your brain coordinating with each other. So it's like a conversation in there. Imagine one part says, let's walk forward. And another part says, no, wait, there's an icy puddle there. And the first part says, oh, no, okay, let's try to move our foot over here instead. But this whole thing happens really fast. And studies show that you have about 100 milliseconds to successfully revise your mental plan before your brain is just locked into a certain course and proceeds with that course no matter what follow-up messages get sent. Otherwise, it's too late and like the neuron conversation gets all jumbled in there. And I want to give a special heads up to any of you who might be aging. I know that's not anyone in here, but in case you come across someone out there in your lives who is aging, scientists believe this may be one of the reasons people fall more as they age, not because their muscles are weaker, but because those neurological processes slow down just ever so slightly over time, and the brain is not able to make those last-minute corrections, right? So there's more falls. This research also has really interesting implications for treating addiction, and right now scientists are trying to figure out exactly what happens right before somebody reaches for a drink or a pill or another triggering substance, because they think if they can better understand that, then they will eventually be able to short circuit that process with some kind of pharmaceutical amendment. I mean, it's really interesting stuff. But I tell all of it to you to underscore how amazing the story of Joseph actually is, because Joseph does change his mind. Matthew tells us that Joseph, when he found out about Mary's pregnancy, planned to dismiss her quietly. He was resolved. Did you hear that as Katie read it? He had decided. But the Spirit arrives, right, in the form of a messenger, and helps him to come to a new conclusion about how to move ahead. And as I take stock of the aspects of the nativity story, as we move through this season, I think, what different aspects of this story do I want to hold on to in the rest of my spiritual life? The boldness of Mary, the hospitality of Elizabeth, the responsiveness of the shepherds, the shrewdness of the Magi, certainly the willingness of Joseph to change his mind should be on that list. You know, I think if Joseph had been alive in 2020, I'm sure he would have eagerly embraced the rise of the word pivot and how important it became to work in our world now. And I just don't want to forget about that. I just don't want to pass right over his story before we move on, because I think we need his example in order to be able to do the work that we're doing that's really important. I think we need his example to do our own personal work that we're doing to be healthy inside of ourselves, work that we're doing to reframe our stories in healthy ways, work that we're doing to renew our relationship, work that we're doing to discern how the Spirit is calling us to be in the world, which sometimes requires recognizing that perhaps the old ways to which we've been called are no longer for us. So I think we need Joseph to do that work, but I think we also need his example to do our work furthering God's reign of love in this world. I want to tell you, I happened to attend a Christmas tree lighting outside the Catholic parish across the street from our house last week. Don't worry, I'm not thinking about converting. We were just there to enjoy some holiday cheer. And before the big countdown and they flipped the switch, the priest came out to offer a prayer. And he talked about Advent and the spirit of the season, anticipation and waiting in the Holy Family. And I got to admit, honesty is welcome here in church. I was kind of thinking, yada, 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 you know, hope and joy and blah, blah, you know, the way that some clergy think when they're listening to other clergy, right? I've heard it all before. But then he said something that just snapped me right back to attention. I got to tell you, he said, let's not forget what this season of Advent is really about, which is justice. And I thought, what? What's he talking about? Isn't it about lights and sparkle and joy and hope and miracles and celebration? I mean, I really thought that. And it totally caught me off guard that he's up there in front of this unlit tree talking about justice. But he went on to say, the anticipation of this season that we feel as we wait for Jesus' birth is intimately connected to our anticipation of the ultimate reign of God, where justice and peace will be known in every corner. And in that way, it's intimately connected to our work to make those things a reality right now. He didn't say it quite like that. I'm paraphrasing. That was the gist of it. Those two things are very much connected. I'm not sure any of the non-theologians there were really tuned into it because they didn't clap or anything, but I thought it was really profound. And it's really very true, this interesting connection between these two things, right? This season, in all its talk about yearning and waiting and preparing and hoping. It is formation for our journey toward God's righteousness. It is encouragement for the times when the change we are struggling for has not yet fully come to be. This time is a training ground for both service work and institutional change work, where we work and watch and wait and prepare and gather and get frustrated, but then name our hopes and tend to each other and work and wait and watch some more. It's training for all of that. And it's also training for the introspective reflection that is necessary alongside that more direct action that we do in the world. In the way that we think in Advent about waiting for something which has already happened. We know the end, Jesus is born long ago, right? But also not yet fulfilled. God's reign is not yet complete. In practicing that and observing that and journeying with that, we are shaped in the discipline of paradox that is necessary for our labor of justice, of looking at ourselves as both treasured and beloved children of God, and at the very same time as people who haven't gotten it all right yet, who can do better, who can and should choose to think and to live in the world differently. And that's because so much of our justice work is about changing our minds, isn't it? About integrating new information about the world and its oppressive proclivities. You want to work on being an anti-racist? Then you have to change your thinking. You have to find ways of recognizing how deep and destructive patterns of being are knit into your consciousness. And you have to actively work to redirect those things. You want to stand in solidarity with the poor and work to alleviate suffering? Then we've got to change our thinking about the origins of poverty and the real steps that lead towards stability, independence, and dignity. We have to change our minds when we look at the vulnerable around us, the lost, the orphan, the displaced, seeing them not as a problem to be solved, but as a neighbor who is bearing the disproportionate burdens of the systems of which we are all a part. And you might remember as you're doing that what the Gospels go on to show, which is that the healer shows up at the margins, in part because the world's sickness can be seen most clearly there. In a summons to turn away from the halls of power and acknowledge that if we truly want healing for ourselves and for the world, we must go to where it is most needed, because that is where the healing spirit can be found. We have to change course and change our minds in order to do that. And now that I stop and think about it, actually, wasn't that the entire ministry of Jesus? I mean, think of a story about Jesus' ministry that's not about asking people to change their minds, change how they see things. We say, look, oh no, the poor, how bereft they are. And Jesus said, the kingdom of God dwells with them. We say, look, the hungry, how empty are their lives. And Jesus says, they will be filled. We say, look at this grief that I hold in my heart. Will it ever be taken away? And Jesus says, you will laugh again. We say, sometimes it feels like everyone is against me. And Jesus says, I am for you. And I can't help but think, reading this story, if he got that from his father, Joseph, helping people change their minds, and helping them do it by giving them hope that is exactly what God did. That's how the story goes, isn't it? If you read beyond this first little part, that this baby that we're all talking about, this baby we're waiting to be born, that baby would grow into something more. That baby would grow into something that would be for us an assurance that God chose to think differently about us. Recognizing that we are an unfinished project, an already redeemed but not yet perfected, an already beloved but not yet wholly loving, an already here but not all the way there people who needed presence, attention, grace, and new willingness to think differently. And if I stand with Joseph and think about the long game of that story, it's enough to help me look forward with hope. And to pray the bravest prayer I think any of us can pray, which is, God, change my mind. In whatever way it needs to be changed, God, change me into what I am becoming for you. And God, change us into something that best serves your word of joy. Help us to be what Joseph was, willing to follow you faithfully in the unknown, laying down what you would ask us to lay down, and trusting that all we need to understand will be revealed. Give us the ears to hear it, the minds to dream it, and the strength to choose it.